So, welcome. We have an exciting journey ahead of us today. So in this session, Jenna from the Cypress team will be joined by some super special guests who will introduce themselves in a second. We're all representing some really awesome Cypress swag. So 4 different t-shirts on the line, folks. We'll dive into the exciting world of test scalability. We will explore how to enhance software quality and figure out testing challenges in 3 essential areas. So you'll walk away from today's session with some practical strategies and some tips for building a testing strategy that will hold up to complexity and change. So buckle up, let's go. Before we get too far into the content, I wanted to share some questions that are commonly asked. So today's session will certainly be recorded. We'll share it within the next couple of days of this event. If you have any questions about Cypress or for our lovely speakers, please go ahead and use the Q&A functionality so our Cypress team can respond to you. We also have the chat open. We'll be monitoring that, but questions can get kind of buried in the conversation sometimes. So using the Q&A, make sure that we can keep tabs on it and make sure that you get a response. And then if you have any like super specific questions about your implementation or just want to continue the conversation with us, go ahead and join us on Discord. I'll drop the link to that in the Zoom chat. All right. And lastly, before we launch into the roundtable discussion, just wanted to share this resource doc with you that our team and our speakers put together for this event. So there's lots of goodies in there. I'll encourage you to check it out. And I'll also put a link to this in the Zoom chat as well. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jenna on the Cypress team to take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Jess. So my name is Jenna Beckett, and I am a senior technical solutions engineer here at Cypress. And I am joined by some really awesome Cypress ambassadors that I would like to just take a minute and have each of them introduce themselves. So Q, I'll pass it over to you first.
Hey guys, I'm a senior. Actually, I'm not a senior. I'm just an expert developer at JB Hunt, which is a logistics company in the southeast region of the United States. I've been doing software development for a little over a decade. I've been messing with Cypress since 2018, I think around the time it was released. So a lot of experience with Cypress testing with my front-end code.
Awesome. Thanks, Q. Marco, let's go to you next.
Hello, everybody. My name is Marco. I'm running the SHK company that basically specialized in implementing Cypress framework for different kind of projects since 2018, actually, as well. I think version 6, we started using it, something like that between that. Yeah. So that's basically what we're doing so far this last 5 or 6 years. Having a lot of guys doing a lot of educational stuff as well along the actual. That's our thing. We're based in Europe and the Republic of Serbia, so we're covering that part as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Marco. Last but certainly not least, I'll pass it over to Estefania.
Hi, my name is Estefania. I live in the south of Spain. I'm the head of QA at Generally, a company from Cordoba. I've been a test automation lover, and I've been playing with tools such as Selenium, APM for more than 10 years. And Cypress for me was my first JavaScript-based automation tool, and I've been using it since version 4 when they released the support to cross-browser testing. And right now we have more than 4,000 tests running with Cypress, so I think I can share a lot of information in this webinar.
Excellent. We look forward to hearing about your expertise, Estefania, and yours, Q and Marco as well. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's do the Zoom song and dance. Can everybody see my screen? Yeah, okay, cool. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the topics we're going to cover during this discussion. So we are going to touch on test suite architecture and just how to design your test suite for scalability. Of course, a part of that means figuring out a way to manage test data. And when I say a part, I mean a huge part. And then also what environment you're testing in is going to be of major concern. So let's go ahead and dive right in. The first question I have for our panelists is, I'd like for you to assume that someone is just starting to build a test suite from scratch. What would you say are like top 2 key considerations and or possibly prerequisites for getting a project like that started? Let's go to Estefania first.
Okay, I think for me one of the most important thing to consider before creating a huge project is make a project readable and maintainable for the future, because you are going to thanks for that to your future self. And please do not use something like a paid object model or Cucumber. Please use custom command, organize it, and follow the Cypress direction, read all the articles about it. And I think those are the main keys to create a good base for an automation project.
Awesome. Q, what do you think about this?
Assuming everyone here is using Cypress, then you don't have to worry about the very first thing that you have to look for, in my opinion. Which framework am I going to use to do this with? And what type of test am I going to need to actually test? Are we going to have manual QA people, or are my devs expected to test everything as well manually? If I'm going to just write tests, maybe I don't even need, a really fancy test suite. I'm gonna just have a bunch of tests in my whatever my work item manager is. We use Azure DevOps. We originally just had like our QA or our POs would kind of perform QA duties, and they would go and manually test everything. And eventually we just use that test suite as our backing for our end-to-end tests and our integration tests. So pretty much we map each of those things to it. The other thing is going to be like, I guess what I just said, the test strategy. How are we going to test those things? Are we going to mostly test before release and test, or are we going to release in prod? Once you have those 2 questions answered, framework and strategy, I think you can kind of start from there.
Excellent. Yeah, I really resonate with what you said about understanding whose responsibility testing is going to fall to, because going into a testing automation project and not having clear requirements and understanding between different teams of whose responsibility is maintaining each part of the architecture, that really is kind of a recipe for disaster and a recipe for letting things fall by the wayside. Marco, what do you think about this?
I fully agree with previously Q and Stefania said. On top of that, I can add from our perspective that we often face, experienced automation engineers working with some previous, for example, framework, and they're trying to introduce those practices from some other frameworks and trying to make Cypress work for them that way. So this is one of our struggles when starting new Cypress projects with different teams. So our general advice basically hops into 2 points. Keep it as simple as possible in the first phase until everybody know where they are, what they're doing, like you said. So as simple as possible, and follow best practices and official documentation from Cypress website documentation only. So stick to that in the first phase until you have everything ready and set up and stable and everybody know their way around. So I would say that would be the first step to make sure the new teams as well as experienced one. That is the keystone to start good, start fresh, start clean, and have every benefit the Cypress tools and features bring, have it there on the radar and not skipping something because this is how you do it in a different way, a different tool, and it's maybe not needed in Cypress. In most cases, it's not needed. It's already covered by something else. So that would be my point on that one, I think.
So I think you bring up an interesting point about documentation and, again, just setting those very clear requirements from the beginning. One thing I know that a lot of teams are doing from the start of a project like this is coming up with a test strategy document. And that document needs to be created at the beginning, but, it's going to evolve over time. So Marco, how does your team make your test test strategy document a living document, something that can be evolved?
So basically sticking to the first point, that keeping it simple as possible, just outlining what we need to do, how we're going to do it, many timelines, some basic stuff. And then when we dig into it and we go along in parallel with development, we add stuff to it. We decide, we every meeting that we have, maybe with a potential client or basically a production team that we're dealing with, any decision we take from that, how we're going to do stuff, we put it in the document together, mark the responsible person for it, for example, whoever owns this thing that needs to be done. So basically, it is the aggregation of every decision we made, every opinion that we covered, and this is what drives us. And we change it a lot. When we try something, it doesn't look good, or we could do it better, and when we change it, and we discuss about it, change it, we update the document as well, reflect it. So whatever is in the document, that's up to date and currently implemented or in progress of implementing.
Excellent. Let's go on to our next question. And I want to pose to the group a question about testing methodologies and techniques. So what techniques and methodologies do you all use for handling different types of tests, like unit testing, integration testing, end-to-end testing? How do you approach those different tests? And let's start with Q this time.
Sure. Yeah, I actually wrote an article about that not too long ago. I'm an Angular developer, first off. So a lot of what I say is probably going to sound way different, but I do like to group tests based on like responsibility of like what my classes are doing. And so if I have just functionality that I want to test, and my functionality is going to typically live in a service, or in Angular world, it might live in a pipe or a directive. I will want to unit test those because it's hard to really catch edge cases often without having those type of unit tests or those types of tests put in. Outside of that, though, we have component testing now with Cypress gave us not too long ago. And then we have integration into end tests. So my components, which are going to be what the users are typically interacting with, maybe it's a full-on button. When I press that button, what's it do? What am I expecting it to do? I do want to test those via components. I want to stub out the output of that button. If it's like a piece of a page, maybe it's a comment list or something. Are those pipes actually formatting the values correctly? You can't test those things with a unit test, but you can test them with component tests. And then workflows, I typically like to use an integration test. Since I am a front-end developer, I don't want to test my back-end code usually because it's outside of my scope of work. We do use real data from the back-end, but we do mock everything on our test. On the integration test side, and we do still perform the workflows that were associated to work items that were like the manual QA things. I still try to use that whole the RC heuristic there. And so any type of recent or core regression type items, I still really focus in on and never delete those tests from our workflows. But yeah, I think all three types of tests should be, or four if you really want to get technical, should be implemented if you want to make sure you have a well-tested product.
Awesome. Thanks, Q. Estefania, let's go to you. What do you think about this?
I agree with everything that Q said. And also, I think it's good to use the developers to resort. For example, we have tests that cover different languages. So we can run multi-languages tests using the same application that the developer used for the copies in the development. So I think this kind of tool, for example, the emails, the languages, we also have an API for QA to create the resources like the users, the license that we need to before running the test. I think all of the resources that you can use from the development in your project, being unit tests or end-to-end tests or integration tests, I think it is really useful to have those in the same repository all together and being able to run them separately when you need it and all together if that's the case.
Excellent. Marco, I'm going to send it over to you, and I would add, when you're thinking about these different types of tests, there's a lot of conversation around shift left testing. So when do you consider shift left? Is it only for certain types of tests, or is it for your entire test suite?
One of our experiments experiment project that we had basically regarding shift left, we persuaded the client we work with that we can do automation in parallel with development. It tends to be a little mythical thing in general ways, but it is achievable when the level of awareness and understanding is achieved in such a way. So as soon as a piece of requirement is written and it is approved to be developed, we start working on it, we start thinking about it, we start designing it, we communicate on what we expect that will happen in the development, in the product, on the product level, on the real page, on the test page, whatever, and then basically prepare everything as much as possible, to be honest. So it's about 80, in practice, about 80%, everything is pretty much ready until they release it to a test environment for tests to be executed. So that's I think, one of the best things we were able to achieve in practice, to go as left as possible, to have it as in the moment of that they said we're going to develop this, it looks like this, you're going to do things like this, and these are particular stuff that you need for automation. Here you go, we can start working on it even if the code is not deployed yet.
Excellent. All right, folks, let's go on to, again, we're still digging into that test suite architecture. The next question I have for the panel is, what is one or two best practices for structuring or organizing your test cases? And in your opinion, are there some really big mistakes that you've seen in projects? And I'm going to toss it over to Estefania first.
Okay. I think one of the main things that you need to do is create great selectors, because you cannot wait and check elements that you are not sure 100% the name of or the ID or the class. You can use data CI, test ID, data test, or whatever, but make sure that you are clicking, seeing, interacting with the correct button or element. And I think having that proper base and adding that attribute to the code is a very good practice that you need to make sure that you have. And then being simple, like arrange, act, and assert on the test, make it readable, and make everyone in the team a participant of the project. Make them understand it and make them work with you and help you and run the test as much as they need for improve the product and catch the bugs as soon as possible.
Yes, make everyone a participant in the process. We say that louder for the folks in the back, please. That is awesome. I love that. Q, tell me what you think about this.
Yeah, so me and Jordan Paul of Cypress fame have talks all the time about best practices and stuff about data architecture and data management. And one of the things that he always talks about, I don't know if you guys know this internally, maybe it's a Cypress thing, but the 3 pillars of any testing framework. And one of them is how well or how fast can a person write their tests? I think Cypress gives a great framework allowing us to extend any of its things. So one of the first things that I like to do when I'm making a project is go ahead and get rid of that data sci selector thing that we do and just have a select by data sci function that can just pass in those types of things to make those shortcuts easier. I don't want to type out data sci equals whatever the element name is over and over in my test selectors. That's kind of the first thing that I always do. The second thing is, I think it was Cypress 10 maybe was when we got rid of the integration folder and turned it to end-to-end instead. My last answer is kind of hint back. So immediately when I saw that change, I changed it back to integration tests because I just don't like to have that mindset of these aren't end-to-end tests. I'm not actually calling it back in. So I still organize that way. Another thing is we have module federation and micro front end. So we have several libs, smaller projects that build out into a remote. NX is great about this. If you've ever used the NX console or NX dev tools, it'll separate your projects by apps and libraries. And so anything in my app will run a full suite test. It'll run integration workflow type tests, or if you had end-to-end test, it would test in that structure. So every application has a end-to-end test associated with it. So if I want to run a test for, let's say in JB Hunt world, we have loads. So I could say run into and test against the apps loads module. But all of my component tests and typically my unit tests are all going to live inside of a lib directory, where each library functionality piece directory will have its own test associated with it. So the Jasmine or Jest test will test those tests. And then we'll also have component tests to test the component portions of those views.
Excellent. Marco, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well.
Well, yeah. I'm thinking of some interesting examples that we had so far. So, I must say, in many cases, doing some commercial projects and stuff like that, people would like to, the business people, the Scrum Master, project manager, project owners, stakeholders, they would like to have a review of the test structure and the test cases there in the structure, visually, to just take a look and see what is covered, not reading any complex reports from time to time, but rather just give it a glimpse on the things and to see to get a feeling of the coverage. I know it's not like really reliable, but that is the thing from practice. So we tend to, whatever the development framework methodology uses, the Kanban or Scrum or doing waterfall or something else with Spiral, whatever remodel, we tend to at least try to structure our test framework in this particular project, if we have the freedom to do that, actually, to match that structure of how they are developing.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're going sprint by sprint and feature by feature, we're trying to create a feature folders and put tests regarding this feature within this feature folder. And if they're using a lot of stories that are complex stories, maybe not the easy ones like 5 points, something like that, we maybe go a little bit of granular there and go into this kind of folder structure. But in general, stick it to feature or module level. So keep it around the one of, can say, the user or the feature, basically the module that is going to do something, because this allows us later on to select or manipulate the tasks there to run them exclusively, or to make sure that to basically manipulate the task execution later more granular, with more control. So we try to basically, if they are structuring their test or not the test point, but user stories like that, we try to reflect that in our test structure as much as possible, at least from the top level.
Yeah, I support this. We talk a lot internally at Cypress about user stories and how following a user story or a critical user path and organizing your test around that makes for a really good testing environment. And I think it also allows you to make sure you don't have any major gaps when you're following a feature or a specific user path, because it is really easy when they're grouped together like that to be able to go and say, okay, look, I think I've got a pretty good coverage of this particular feature. Whereas if they're spread apart across many different folders in your structure, it gets a little harder. Things get lost in transit, especially as you have new folks come into your team and they don't actually know where everything is dispersed. So great points, folks. One thing that we're talking about here is scalability. So when you are thinking about your test suite and how it is going to continue to work well as your app and your team grows, what are some of the considerations you make? Like what are you building in maybe to your architecture or to your test strategy that helps ensure scalability as things evolve over time? Marco, actually, let's go to you first.
Yeah, thanks. Basically, just from our recent experience, we tend to keep it simple as possible. Again, going back to that point. So initially, rely on documented best practices. Start with that. Stick to it as much as possible. It's already aggregated. It's already tested. It's already proved. Confirmed by the Cypress engineers. Confirmed by community. If there were any better solution, it would have been best practice already. I'm not saying that there aren't any, but just saying start with that. Use what's already there. And whenever you deviate from a best practice document, official best practice, you document it internally within a wiki part of your project or wherever you need to go. You say, yeah, this is the best practice. We want to go there, but for some reason it doesn't suit our project, it doesn't suit our application, doesn't suit our development process, whatever. And we need to deviate here in this direction. It's a trade-off. We maybe gain some benefits there, but we lose some benefits over there, choosing this and that. So documenting everything that is custom in this internal wiki, and for everything else, you just point the new guys towards official best practice documentation. So basically, whenever somebody joins the team, he doesn't have to, go look around, explore for weeks or something like that to learn what has been structured. But rather, if he ever worked with Cypress before, it would be easy for him to, oh, you're using custom commands, I know where they are, I know what they're doing. Oh, you're using this and that. Okay, if I'm not sure what that is, I'll just go to the official documentation, read about, and see your implementation of that feature. So that's our, recipe for success in this kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think those clear requirements that you're talking about is a really good way of making sure you don't accumulate test debt. Something that scares everyone, because the debt never seems to get paid off. All right, I'm actually going to go on to another question, and I'm going to send this to Estefania. Estefania, what metrics or measurements should be considered to assess the effectiveness of a front-end test suite?
Well, for example, we are very focused on the flaky tests. We are trying to avoid every time that we have one, make sure it doesn't being reproduced again, and fix them as best as possible. Then we made a test coverage. We used the plugin on the Cypress documentation. We use it to make sure that we were covering everything on the application, on each part of the application. We are still working on it, but I think it's really good for the developers and for the QAs also make sure and see exactly how many lines of code are covered by the test. Run the test as much as you can, and of course, making or have an environment which is as much as similar as your production environment, because if you are testing in something which is not quite similar to production, you're not going to find any bugs or any issue. And then, well, make sure that the quality is not QA responsibility, it's all the team responsibility, and run the test on each pull request, for example. Make sure that if you're, I don't know, doing something with the API, you're testing your integration test and running every test related to the API changes.
Awesome. Q, what do you have to say about this? What metrics or measurements does your team consider vital?
And I would have to say the easy answer is how many bugs are being created in prod. One of the first things that I did whenever I joined JB Hunt, especially when I joined my current team, was to push for Cypress dashboard, Cypress Cloud now. And it was because of the metrics that it showed you, all that historical metadata that it gives you for, I mean, not for free, you do got to pay for it, but it's worth the money. And we almost had to get rid of it. And I was like, I'm going to quit this job if I don't get to keep this Cypress Cloud thing, because this is just, I don't want to do extra work if it's already telling me what bugs are coming up. And we run, I saw a question pop up earlier about, can you run these things in parallel? Or are there any support for that? And yeah, the running, you get parallelization for free when you pay for Cypress Cloud. And we run our tests every PR. So every integration test that we have in our framework, we run at PR time, because we trust our tests. They ran for so long. We have, I think our product's pretty big, but we run component tests and we run integration tests as well. But there's about 500 tests that run at PR time. So if something breaks there, we know that, hey, something changed in our code base that is now breaking a test. We're not going to approve your PR. That code is not going into test or prod. So we're able to fix that really quick. So if the test itself fails, then we know that either something changed that needs to be updated in the test, or your code is just broken. So we can go address that. We just caught some pretty big changes with our localization stuff. We have localization text that was being tested as part of our end-to-end suite. And just the wasn't capitalized, and we knew that, okay, well, something got caught, we can go fix that, and there is no issue. So we can go update the manual test as well. So it's an awesome tool. If you haven't looked into it yet, I see they posted it in the chat. I would highly advise you to go look that up and add that to your project.
Awesome. Thank you, Q. Going on to our next question, Marco, I'm going to send this one over to you. What are your favorite emerging trends or technologies in front-end testing that you think are going to have a significant impact on how you design test suites in the future?
Oh, that's an easy answer. I have no idea at the moment. To be perfectly honest, that is quite honest. We pick up things along the way, try them, experiment with them, and if you find them usable in a particular project, we implement and see how they go. But nothing I can point out at this point, really, depending on the project you're working on. So it used to be image comparison thing for some designer websites, products, stuff like that. That was really, really useful. And AI, of course, helping things getting into speed. There are tools, but I'm just waiting for them, or waiting for to see some practical value that we can utilize, experiment them, utilize them on real projects. An experiment looks good, it's fine, but we need to see it works in real life real good, and working in some time. I mean, but definitely, I would say if I needed to say on top of my head, AI definitely is something that will help testing, but there will be some trade-offs I expect as well.
I would have to agree with you. I think AI and test automation is going to play a really interesting role in all of our jobs in the next couple of years, especially when it comes to like smart analytics that help teams understand maybe areas of risk. Exactly, what you were talking about, code coverage, being able to see those gaps that you have in your test suite. So I'm interested to see where that goes. I'm also interested to see where quality of speed and what tools come up around quality of speed for teams to leverage and meet the increasingly fast demands of getting your new features out to production. Estefania, I'm going to send you over our next question. And this one is about test data management. So in your teams, what methods do you use for managing test data?
Okay. From the beginning, we started doing the tests with the register and the registration through the UI, but this took us a lot of time to run the test. So we make an API for QA, as I said before. And with that API, what we do is create the user, the licenses, the data that we need to make sure that when you start running the test and you do a login request, everything is done for you. You are just at the point for testing everything that you need. So for us, that was a game changer because we increased a lot the speed of the test and helped us a lot to create everything that we needed. Also helped us with the backend team because at the end, we were using our API from the backend team. Another thing that we use is having environments that are dynamic, and they are quite similar to our production environment. These environments are created on each pull request. If you want, you just added a label and a new environment is just running for you with Kubernetes. You run your tests, do everything that you need. You have like a database by default. You can use that user, you can use that information, you can create a new one. And then after that, you can kill that environment, you merge your pull request and everything is clean for the next people to use it. And of course, mocking some special requests or special services that you need to use and you need to handle that data and control that information, you have to mock it.
Excellent. Yeah, I agree with you. Virtualization is a game changer when it comes to test data management. Q, what methods are your team using for managing test data?
well, JB Hunt's a big company, so every team does something differently. But our team specifically is using fixtures. So side fixture to stub out request data. We do make the request, we intercept it, and then we just stub it with real data. It still fits the same model as what you would get from the back end, and it's actually live data. I don't, the thing says synthetic, but maybe that's what it is. Another thing that you can do to make those easier, depending on what your back end, or about, I guess, what your security looks like, you could make that job really easy. And just, I think it's what Stefania was talking about, where you can use like a side.write file after you intercept, and it'll just write the fixture for you. And I mean, that's really quick. You can, if you're doing like a side project that doesn't have any security, if you're really hesitant about testing in prod, you can always stub in a side.write file first to save your data for you, and it'll just print out that entire that model of the contract there, and you can use that in your future tests.
Awesome. Marco, what about your teams? I'm sure you guys probably have different approaches per project, but is there something that, you know, is kind of a go-to standard for you all?
Definitely. We, to achieve test isolation, we try to basically not get attached to any environment we're testing on, right? So try to keep tests isolated. That means that we need to create, right, test data on the fly. So for that purposes, we either use JSON as fixtures and best practices, or we use dynamic tests that basically generate test data on the fly. And this part has two, of course, it has two parts of it. It has some static data, fixed data, I don't know, the URLs that we need to visit, or something, some fixed part that we stored in JSON file and picture files, and some random stuff that will be randomized on each execution, so we don't get failed test cases because there's already data in the database. So we do not recommend maintaining a database connection, as it would be a, you know, liability, or how to say, you know, maybe potential issue later on. But rather create our test data, clean up afterwards, or clean up before. That's always a you know, a challenge. But create test data on the fly, randomize as much as you need and as much as you can. Use API, like Stefania said. Basically, what we do, we utilize API as much as possible, basically to navigate to the page we need to execute tests on. So we set up everything through API before the and before block, or before each block. We do every test setup there, data setup there, everything set up, and just basically our test opens the page with a particular setup, particular things, preconditions, and then execute the test and closes them. This way we basically reduce time, and this is our basic game changer for you know, showing people the power of Cypress. So it's that fast, it's that easy to do, and this basically brings you all the speed and reliability that you need, basically, because it will not stop on some previous page that used to work yesterday, but today got some issues or something like that.
Excellent. I'm going to go on to talking about test environment management now. So Q, I'm going to send this over to you, and I'd like to know, what are the key challenges involved with maintaining test environments, especially in the context of a pretty complex front-end application like you have at JB Hunt?
Oh man, that's a good question. Since we do our PRs with the automated tests, we don't test against other environments other than our first level, because our tests don't change, or the code doesn't change. But we do have teams that do test against prod. We have teams that test in every environment. I'm not a huge advocate of testing, like somebody said, real world application. Like, we have a lot of things that could go wrong if we use test data and it actually triggered, let's say I have something where I'm going to send a bill to some client. I don't want to accidentally press a button in my test that ends up doing that. So at the absolute best, we used to at one point run tests against our test environment to try and catch things, but not as much anymore. We do smoke test against test and prod. I think that's about the extent of where I would go with testing something against actual data.
Awesome. And you know, you're talking about the the scary stories that can come out of testing, especially in a prod environment. And I wonder if anyone on the panel has some real life examples where they could share about how, really excellent environment management increased the quality of speed of a particular application. Estefania, is there any examples that you can think of?
Yes, as I said, I think having that problem, as you said, is quite difficult. We try not to test exactly in production, but we have a test environment which is exactly the same as production. And when a release is done, that pod, a particular pod, is restored with the version of production. So we are testing exactly in production. And for the environment that we are talking about, that I talked about before, those environments, imagine that you have like 5 parts of your application. If you are using or changing only one of them, for example, the dashboard, and the other application are using the same image, which is in production right now, and you are only testing your dashboard changes. So for us, it's quite good to be able to know exactly where the problem is, or where do we need to test, or if something is failing there, is because you did something on your pull request that is breaking things in production, and that is going to break things in production. So I think for us, that was also again changing. Our infrastructure team is made a huge work about that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I know I've experienced in the past situations where, and this especially applies when you're doing greenfield development, where not something that's sped up the project, but something that has almost made it come to a complete halt because, you have your team that is doing testing in an environment where you're also like sharing it with developers as a code sandbox. I mean, it's kind of a recipe for disaster because that environment is going to be ever evolving. Data is going to be completely unstable, and trying to test in it and get accurate results from your test that you can rely on is kind of close to impossible, honestly. Well, folks, that is the end of the questions I have for the panel, but I know we have had some questions come through the Q&A. So I'm going to bring up the Q&A and see, what questions we have and send them over to the panel. So the question we have right now that's open is, which approach is the best to create a complete data set before all tests, or to create data before each individual test? And Marco, I think you touched on this earlier. So you want to take this one?
Sure. Well, I'm thinking about it at the moment. So we use both approaches where applicable, basically. So I think I would go in general way. I would go with each test, because sometimes I wanna filter out, for example, Cypress grep tool. That's very good tool to filter tasks that you want to use. So I want to filter them out, and I want to create test data only for tests I filtered out to execute. For whether that it's a smoke or of a feature test or whatever subset of tests I want to go. I don't want to create that spec file that should contains 10 or 20 tests. I don't want to create test data for all of them if I'm going to execute just one. So I would keep them in parallel. So test data versus test case creation, rather than test suite or describe block versus test data creation. I'll go with option 2 in this case, but okay. It depends. Yeah.
Thanks, Marco. Another question that I saw is, what kind of abstraction models have been effective? And Estefania, I'm going to send that one over to you because I think that's one that you touched on a little earlier.
Mm-hmm. I think it depends. It depends of how do you manage the project, how do you understand the project, and how you plan everything before running the test.
Okay. Another question we have in chat is, and Q, I'm going to send this one over to you. It's, how do you organize custom commands? I know you mentioned the first thing you do in a project is get those custom commands in there, because nobody's got time to write out those selectors every time. So how do you organize your custom commands?
Mostly by functionality. We do have a really big group of them. I mean, I'm sure the other two panelists probably have more than us, because I don't mind I don't mind repeating myself in my test. I like my test to be kind of verbose, but if it's something that's going to shortcut like the actual like selector or some type of functionality, like if I wanted to select an entire input field, then I want to do that functionality every time, I will create a function for that. And they are kind of grouped by, and they have comments on them, and maybe like I'll throw a sci-log and then it'll tell what it's doing, and that way you can still have that sense of readability in the GUI. But yeah, I mean, short answer, functionality is the best way to group those things.
Excellent. Another question that we have coming through chat is, what is the best way to use tags to run specific tests or sets of tests? And is tags even the best way to do that? Marco, do you have some thoughts on this one?
Yeah, we use Cypress grep tool. We tagged our test with the tags like regression sanity, positive, negative, this and that, and on the particular project, because client was kind of used to those things, describing what this test actually is. And this gave him the power of, I want to run all negative test cases, all test cases that are, I don't know, negative and or falls under the sanity or smoke or regression also. So combining tags, excluding tags, combining some, excluding some as well. This tool give you great power of managing on the execution level. So this happens on the execution level. And I would recommend that if the environment of the project is that if you have scripts, you have those scripts you want to, what you want to execute when and in which environment. So yeah, that would be my recommendation for sure.
Excellent.
Using tags. Yeah.
I have one more, and this is for anyone in the group. Someone said that our unit tests are heavily fixture dependent and written in Cypress. If we start writing end-to-end tests using the same fixtures, then what will be the difference between unit and end-to-end tests? So that's open for anyone to pick up.
Well, unit testing, I'll say unit testing functionality, like generally, if I'm saying something's a unit test, I'm expecting, like, I'm going to pass in some values, I'm going to get a value back, and I'm going to always expect those. I mean, that's a pure function essentially. You can write unit tests that are a little more specific, I guess. Like if I'm using something like object-oriented programming, I got to test properties inside of an object. You're not going to be able to do that in a integration test. Integration test should be testing multiple units together. And so if you are integrating several units, then you no longer have a unit test. It is an integration test by definition.
And
Exactly.
Estefania, go ahead.
Completely agree with him. And as they say on the chat, you can also split your test between end-to-end, component, unit, and make sure that each of them only use and do exactly what they are meant to be.
Awesome. All right, folks. I want to say thank you to all of our amazing panelists who have lended their expertise to this discussion. I think we got a lot of really great information. So Q, Marco, Estefania, thank you guys so much for the conversation and for your input. I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen share, and I believe I'm sending it back over to Jess to wrap things up.
All right, amazing. Thank you all so much for this session. It was super helpful. I definitely learned a lot. And yeah, we'll go ahead and close this out. We got a ton of really amazing questions. Thank you so much for our audience for engaging with us so much throughout this discussion. We'll send out that recording within the next couple of days, so you'll find that in your email. And yeah, thank you so much to everyone. We'll go ahead and close out this event, but have a great rest of your Wednesday.